On Thursday, April 24th, the Karen Read retrial saw day 3 of testimony. This was a shorter day, which selfishly I was pretty happy about because I'm definitely already behind on these recaps. But anyway, the jury heard from 4 witnesses on day 3, and as before, they also saw more clips from the Karen Read interviews. And some of these clips are now starting to check off elements that the Commonwealth needs to prove in order to convict Karen. So this really isn't a good thing for the defense. But of course, the big question is, will the Commonwealth have checked off enough boxes by the end of this trial to actually convict her? Let's get into it. Okay, so as before, if you need catching up, there are playlists linked in the description below, so definitely go down there and check them out if you need them. And if you're new here and you want to see more recaps like this one, like the video, share the video, subscribe, and do all the other YouTube-y things. Otherwise, let's dive in. Day 3 started off by picking up where Daniel Whitley's cross-examination left off on day 2. And in the cross-examination, David Yannetti made a few main points. First, he touched on Karen's resistance to doing a urine test. He pointed out with Whitley that she was there because she was section 12, meaning she was there for a psych evaluation. And because of that, she had to be under constant observation by someone like one of the nurses. And so to do the urine test, she had to pee in front of someone. And as it just so happened, she was on her period and didn't have a tampon. So it was kind of an uncomfortable and embarrassing situation. Now, I'm not going to lie, for me personally, it did feel even more uncomfortable hearing all of this come out in a conversation between 2 men in an open courtroom talking about a woman's period. But I think that may have been part of what Yannetti was going for. But regardless, as Whitley agreed, eventually Karen did in fact give a urine sample. Anyway, the other thing that Yannetti really wanted to hit on in this cross-examination was the statement that Whitley said that Karen had made about John being out in the cold for many hours. It took a little bit of wrangling through impeachments using Whitley's prior testimony at the grand jury hearing and a trial a year ago. But Yannetti eventually got Whitley to agree that Karen was not making a declaration like she was informing him that she knew John had been out in the snow for many hours. Rather, Whitley agreed that she was asking a question like if it was hypothetically possible. This is important to the defense because they don't want the jury to think what the Commonwealth wants them to think, which is that she knew exactly how long he had been out there because she had killed him when she left him out to die in the cold after hitting him with her car. Anyway, that was the end of Whitley's testimony. Next, the Commonwealth introduced this clip.
And his mother leans over the kitchen island and says to me, I think it looks like you got hit by a car. It looks like you got hit by a car.
All right, who's your next witness, Mr. Brennan?
Next witness is DeMulis.
So, as it turned out, the court ended up allowing the Commonwealth to show this clip to the jury after all, after they had had arguments on day 2 about it. And I'm not gonna lie, this does not make Karen look good. She looks very snarky, and it doesn't really look all that great if you're new to this case, especially right on the heels of Margaret O'Keefe's testimony yesterday. Anyway, next, the Commonwealth called up their 6th witness. This was DeMulis, the general manager of C.F. McCarthy's bar. The only purpose of her testimony was to introduce and authenticate the video surveillance footage from McCarthy's bar, presumably so that the Commonwealth could use it later with another witness. And after that, she was let off the stand. Super quick testimony. Then the Commonwealth called their 7th witness. This was Michael Camerano, one of John's friends. Michael's friend is apparently a close friend with Kaylee, John's niece, who is sometimes referred to as John's daughter in the testimony, given his guardianship over Kaylee and Patrick. Anyway, Michael testified that on January 29th, 2022, he and John wanted to get the girls together because they had just found out that they were accepted to the same school for the upcoming school year. So the girls were together at John's house, and Michael and John went out to C.F. McCarthy's bar. Michael said that they started drinking together, and then another one of John's friends also showed up. Not long after that, Karen arrived. Michael testified that everything seemed to be pretty normal between John and Karen. When she arrived, the two were affectionate. They hugged, they kissed, and as time went on, they were smiling and laughing and hugging, and like I said, everything seemed pretty normal. And on cross-examination, David Yannetti drew out of Michael that John also had asked Michael to make sure that his car was moved over so that Karen could park her car in the garage later that night since everyone was expecting a blizzard. So the implication here was that John was chivalrous towards Karen, which might suggest a continuation of their relationship. The Commonwealth wants to convince the jury that John and Karen's relationship was already on its way out, but the defense wants the jury to conclude that their relationship was actually relatively solid despite all of its warts. Anyway, when asked if Karen was also drinking, Michael testified that he saw Karen had a glass glass in her hand at the bar. So it sounds like he couldn't really testify to what was in the glass, but she was definitely holding something. Anyway, Michael says that he left around 9:30 or 10 p.m. because he got a call that his son had knocked his tooth out playing hockey with his friends. So he went to get his son, and then he went to get his daughter from John's house, and then they all went home. The next morning, he says that he got a call around 5 or 6 a.m. that John had gotten into some kind of trouble, so he drove back to John's house and picked up Kaylee. Kaylee then hung out with Michael's daughter that morning, and eventually that same day, he got a call that John was gone, and he brought Kaylee back home without breaking the news to her. So that was Michael Camerano's testimony. Next, the Commonwealth recalled Massachusetts State Trooper Nicholas Guarino. He, of course, was the digital forensics witness who testified on day 2 about the Celebrate extractions. And honestly, I think the Commonwealth is employing a good strategy by breaking out Guarino's testimony into segments like this. The stuff that he's testifying about is really dry, but it's really important, especially in a case like this where part of the jury's job is to piece together who was where and when and what they were doing when they were there. And so by breaking this testimony into sections like this, they're not boring the jury to death by making them sit for hours and hours at a time to hear very, very technical information. Instead, they're getting these in more digestible chunks, which keeps their focus refreshed. Anyway, this time Guarino testified more about the cell phone extractions. One part of this was where he talked about how he made reports about various text and call logs between some of the individuals involved in these events. For example, he made reports for texts between John O'Keefe and Jen McCabe and between John and Karen. And he made reports for phone calls between John and Karen, John and Ken, and Karen and Carrie Roberts. But the biggest part of his testimony was when he went through all the text messages and phone call records between John and Karen from January 28th, 2022, mostly during the afternoon, up until maybe like 8 p.m. He also testified that he had a report about the same kind of information for later that night on the 28th going into the 29th, so I'm sure we'll be hearing about that later. But for now, the Commonwealth wanted the jury to focus on and digest the nearly 200 texts and calls between Karen and John from the afternoon of January 28th, 2022, before they went out that night. Basically, to sum up all of these communications, the two of them got into a fight starting in the morning. And Karen really, really wanted to talk about it, seemingly to resolve it. But John said that he wanted space and otherwise didn't want to talk about it or resolve it, at least at that time. You can tell because she also calls a bunch of times in between all of these text messages, and he rejects most of those calls. Then he even texts her at a few points saying that he doesn't want to talk, or at least not now. Now, the defense has been trying to show this whole time that Karen and John's relationship was great. However, this is showing that they definitely were having a fight earlier in the day on January 28th, 2022. And there seems to be a particular dynamic going on here that's very common in relationships. Karen definitely seems to be more of an anxious person whose tendency is to want to move closer when she feels vulnerable or insecure so that she can have her insecurities eased by her partner. But based on these communications, it seems like John has a tendency to be more of an avoidant kind of person. And that combination is common in relationships, but it can also definitely lead a relationship into a sort of circular dysfunction if the two don't resolve those tendencies, or at the very least work to try to understand one another. Anyway, there definitely did seem to be a bit of that in these communications where they were working through some things that each of them were dealing with and trying to be a good partner. Karen alluded to dealing with some health issues, and John referenced the stress of parenting when he felt like he wasn't all that great at it. But then there also were some parts of this conversation that was a little bit less productive. There were definitely aspects of it that seemed like both of them were sort of pushing each other's buttons in the heat of the moment. And, at some points, Karen talked about John's head not being in the relationship. And she also referenced how it seemed like he didn't really think about their future. And that seems to suggest that she's saying he doesn't want a future with her. This is important because the Commonwealth wants the jury to have the impression that this couple did not actually have a future because both of them knew that it was ending. But I will say, to me personally, it's unclear how much of this was a picture of reality and how much of this was, say, for example, Karen's insecurity coming out in a moment of vulnerability. But anyway, that was it from Guarino for now. Before they were released for the day, the jury saw the following clip.
When you walked out of the bar, how many drinks had you had?
I had probably about 4. And not 4 that I completed either. I didn't drink maybe more than a few sips at the waterfall.
And 4 drinks you felt fine to drive?
Yep.
Clip 8, please.
Okay.
And is the level of intoxication pretty high here for everybody?
It's happy.
Yeah.
It's,
Because you'd had a lot to drink, right?
I wouldn't say, I had like a normal amount. Like a vodka tonic every 40 minutes.
Okay. And so are you feeling like buzzed? And I'm not judging, I'm just trying to get a sense.
Buzzed.
Yeah.
Clip 9, please.
The final count of my alcohol intakes, probably about 5 or 6 or 4. The drinks that they were pouring me at McCarthy's, which is where I consumed most of the alcohol, was the weakest vodka tonic. It tasted just like all soda water with lime. Not that I need it to be a martini, but it might have had a splash of vodka in it. So I said, John, this drink tastes like it has no vodka in it. And he said, just get a shot and mix it yourself. So each drink was being counted as a double. So I would get a vodka tonic, and then I would pour a shot into it, so that would count as 2. Frankly, it just felt like a regular cocktail. It was just a really weak pour, so I asked for a shot. So for my taste, it just tasted like that's the normal strength of what a drink should be. So I had maybe 2 or 3 that are being counted as 4 and 6. And I don't know. I felt fine. I felt like I was buzzed. And then there was one drink, the last one that was given to me, which I would have counted as 3, but they're counting as my 6th cocktail. The guys that we were with brought around the shots, and they gave me one that I didn't drink, but I poured it in my drink. So that's now my 5th and 6th drinks, with the 7th, which is a shot that all the men did, and I poured it. So that one glass that I'm holding, that I go into the waterfall with, has 3 drinks in it, a vodka tonic and 2 shots. And which is why John said to me, you're not leaving that drink here, like you haven't touched it and just poured a bunch of vodka. He's like, just take it with you, which was something he always did. So then I go into waterfall, and I put that drink down and I socialize most of the time. So that would have been my 5th, 6th, and 7th drinks. Then John orders me a drink at the waterfall that I don't drink, that he takes with him. And then there was a round of shots that Chris Howard bought that I did take. So that would have been the night. But I did not consume 9 vodka martinis or take 9 shots, depending on how you count it. And the last 2 drinks I didn't touch.
Clip 10, please.
I mean, I'm not as clear as I would be if I hadn't been drinking. I mean, I had drank, so, and that led me to question, like, could I have hit him? Did I run over his foot or hit him in the knee? Did I incapacitate him? I mean, I always drive with my music blasting ever since I was 16. And I know when John got out of the car to go into Fairview, I know my car was blasting because when I got in it the next morning to go look for him, I had to immediately turn it down. And I don't know, it's stormy. I have had a few cocktails. I didn't black out, but I wasn't as lucid as I would have been if I had gone to bed at 9 and drank a tea. But so I was fuzzier than I would have been if I had had no alcohol.
Clip 11, please.
How did you feel after that many drinks? When you got in the car, did you feel like you could drive, and did you feel how
I wouldn't have gotten on the expressway. I wouldn't have gotten on the expressway at 12:15 on January 29th. I mean, it was quiet. The roads were very quiet. You can see it on the videos. And I was going, you know, when I've had a few drinks and I drive, I always drive extra slow. So I know my alerts aren't as sharp as they should be. But I
shouldn't have been driving. But I don't think I was driving. I know I wasn't driving recklessly. I mean, I've got plenty of video of myself driving all over the place. I put my car in John's garage, which is incredibly narrow, and I had a very oversized SUV. You see me, there's a video of me driving through the intersection when we leave Waterfall to go to Brian Albert's, and I was always taught by my father, even when you have a green light, you always should tap the brake. You don't know who's going to run red. And I see me doing that multiple times between 12 and 1 and 5 and 6 a.m. So I know I was driving safely, not as safely or as alert as I would be if I had no alcohol. But I was not driving recklessly by any measure.
Thank you.
So now we have Karen saying that she felt buzzed that night from drinking vodka tonics. We also have Karen claiming that her drinks were made really weak, basically a splash of vodka in a glass of otherwise just tonic. It's hard to tell how much of that is objectively true and how much of that is that she's just used to very, very strong drinks. But she explains that this is why she was putting vodka shots in her drinks that were already vodka tonics. So to her, she didn't have 9 drinks, she had more like 4 or 5, and she says that she didn't even really drink all of them. I will say though that of all the clips, this one to me seemed like it oddly enough actually helps Karen a little bit because it gives a different possibility for how much alcohol was in these drinks. But on the other hand, it also could make her look like she's just an alcoholic. I'm not sure. The jury could take it one way or the other. And the problem with the rest of these clips, of course, is that she's talking about being buzzed, possibly driving recklessly. These clips are helping the Commonwealth check off more of these elements of the charges that they have to prove in order to convict Karen. So one by one, it does feel like the Commonwealth is chipping further and further away at the case. But like I said at the beginning of this video, the big question here is whether they'll be able to check off every box that they need in order to convict. Because remember, the prosecution has the burden of proving these charges beyond reasonable doubt. And we are in the Commonwealth's case in chief, where the jury is more likely to feel like the Commonwealth is winning. That all might change when the defense puts on their case in chief, however. Time will tell. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Do you think the Commonwealth is pulling ahead so far, or is the defense scoring important points? Is there anything in this trial that hasn't come up yet that you are looking forward to that you know of from trial 1? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you would hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out there. And if you are really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel, consider becoming a member of Byte Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. See you in the next one.